Hello and good morning, MYM Insiders. How's everybody doing today? This is Rich, excuse me, and we are here for our Business Builder book review. And I'm going to review a book today that I came across, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. And, well, I'll show you what the book is. You probably know from the title, but it is called Contagious, Why Things Catch On by Jonah Berger. And I have a confession to make. This was not my favorite book that I've ever read, which probably prompts the question. The obvious question is, well, why did you choose to review it if it's not your favorite book that you've ever read? And the answer is pretty simple. It's because it had some pretty good ideas in it that I thought were worthwhile. It was definitely, it's a short book. It was an easy read. I actually, when I review books like this, I'll typically listen first to the audiobook version, and then I'll go back and read and make notes in the printed version. But the printed version of this book is, it's just right around 200 pages. It's a small book. It's not even, physically speaking, a very large book on the smaller side of things. So I don't think this guy really had all that much to say, but he had some interesting anecdotes and some interesting stories in there, and it was definitely thought-provoking on a few levels. I'll give you a little warning. Number one, I do recommend that this is a book that you could and should read. It will give you some ideas. But the warning is there was a lot of times when I was listening and reading this book when I thought that point is really obvious. It's not particularly insightful. However, the value in this book, I think, comes from the examples and the stories. And I did find myself having some really good ideas. So from an innovation standpoint, I think it's definitely worthwhile. So why do products, ideas, and behaviors catch on? Contagious. This is kind of dovetailing onto the whole idea of things that are viral. And the reality is there's two other books. One of these two I've already reviewed before, called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. And the book before both of these, which was called The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell, I've read both of the books, and I think The Tipping Point was a good book on the topic of sort of this viral thing, but it was not really as prescriptive as it was descriptive. Made to Stick, I think, was an excellent book. Highly recommend that. I've already done a review on that. You can look it up in our archives. I think I did it in 2013, so it wasn't that long ago. But this book is kind of a tag-along. It's like the little brother. It says a lot of the same things that its big brothers say. It's sort of mimicking a lot of the things. It even has an orange cover like Made to Stick. But it does have some redeeming quality in and of itself. So without that sounding like a very ringing endorsement of the book that we're here to talk about today, I do want to go ahead and review it because, again, I do think that there are some interesting ideas that can be gleaned out of this. And if nothing else, it's reasonably entertaining. So let's go ahead and get into this. And he starts the book with the story of a steakhouse in Philadelphia called Barclay's Prime. And they were trying to break into the market. This goes back 10 or more years at this point. And there's a lot of high-end steakhouses there, of course, like there are in all big cities. And they were trying to distinguish themselves. So they came up with this thing called the $100 cheesesteak. They're in Philadelphia. They used a certain cut of beef. They caramelized the onions in a certain way, a certain type of cheese that was relatively rare or whatever. I don't know if there's such thing as a rare cheese. But anyway, they priced it out at $100. And the idea was to generate buzz for Barclay Prime Steakhouse without spending a lot of money on advertising it. I don't think it was even necessarily that they did not have the money to spend on advertising, although I don't know that for a fact. I think it was more just something that they wanted to be known for that would create some buzz. And indeed, it created quite a bit of buzz, the $100 cheesesteak. They wanted to stand out. And they started to recommend that people would buy one and share it as an appetizer for maybe 4, 5, 6 people at a table, and then they could all share the bragging rights. And people talked about this. They ate the $100 cheesesteak. Was it good? Was it not good? And, of course, everybody would want to know, if you ate the $100 cheesesteak, number one, were you crazy to pay that much for a cheesesteak? And number two, how was it? And I think if you look even further under the surface on this topic, you would start to see some confirmation bias that appears. In other words, when you pay $100 for a cheesesteak, dadgummit, it's going to taste really good whether it tastes good or not. But it did do the job of getting people out there talking about it. And here's the key. It created a conversation piece. Created a conversation piece, something that people could talk about. And this is the heart of the matter of this entire book called Contagious, which is giving people something to talk about, making things into a conversation piece. And the $100 cheesesteak is a good example of that. So let's look at well, I guess I was going to say the steps. They are literally the steps. This is an acronym that he created for the 7 things, or excuse me, the 6 things, the 6 principles that drive all sorts of things to become popular. Now, one thing that you need to know as you look at this is that all 6 elements do not have to be present for something to become contagious. In fact, some of the elements are not necessarily compatible with other of the elements. In fact, to give you an example, practical value, which you see there in pink, and social currency, which you see there in S in orange, are not necessarily compatible. In other words, if you have practical value, it loses some social currency and vice versa. So I'll go through that in detail. Of course, that's what the purpose of the webinar is. But to give you just an overview, let's go through this 6 steps briefly, and then we'll jump into them, okay? Social currency, how people look to each other. People want to seem smart. They want to look in the know. So what we're going to do is talk about finding ways to make things interesting so people want to talk about them. Triggers, things that are top of mind that remind people of something. Emotion is pretty obvious. In fact, I found emotion to be the least helpful chapter in this book out of the 6 that are on the screen right now. Public was an interesting one. We'll talk about that a little bit, making things so that people can see them and they are in front of people visually. Practical value, people like to share things that have some sort of practical utilitarian value to other people. And then stories, the value of stories. And that topic has been covered on another webinar that I've done on the topic of stories. It was also covered in the book Made to Stick. It was one of their points that made their acronym, whatever it was. I can't remember what their acronym was. But we'll go through these each in varying levels of detail. I'll have a little bit more detail on some, a little less detail on others, and then I'll give some examples of my own as we go through. Okay, so let's talk about social currency. And like it said on the previous slide, people want to appear to be interesting, accomplished, and distinguished. This is the idea of social currency. Partially explains why people love social media and the internet. Think about what people do on the internet that would fall into these categories. People are on Facebook and social media, and they're also on news websites, Yahoo, and things like that, searching for interesting things to share. Now, part of the reason we search for these things is to entertain ourselves. If we read an interesting story about one topic or another, it's entertaining to us, but it also then gives us social currency that we can go spend in conversations with other people, whether that be in person or whether that be via social sharing, like on Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, and so forth. So the interesting thing about social media is it gives us instant value, instant pathways to be able to share things and to spread this social currency. And we can quickly tell who is good at doing this and who is not. Just think about your own personal Facebook feed if you engage in such behavior. And look at the kinds of things that people put on there that you find to be interesting, relevant, worthwhile, interesting, and those who don't. And it's quite a disparity in some cases, isn't it? People posting things on there that really aren't that interesting. Their social currency is low. It's like having dimes and nickels instead of dollars and $10 and $20 bills. So I want you to understand this, though, because as you look at your company and you say, well, how can I integrate this and make something worthwhile out of this into my company? What we're really talking about is things that are interesting that people would want to share. So I want you to be thinking about that in the back of your mind as we go through this, okay? They have a principle they called remarkability. What things are remarkable. At MYM, we have a similar term called inside reality. But let's take a look. Things that are unusual, extraordinary, novel, surprising, extreme. Again, at MYM, we might call this interrupt value. But think about things that fit these categories of remarkability. These are the things that people would be most likely to want to share because it makes them look interesting, accomplished, or distinguished, to possess and therefore share this information. Gives an example in the book of what's called the Please Don't Tell bar. Now, this is a couple of friends that got together and they wanted to start a bar, and they had this crazy idea. It's in, I believe, in New York. They went to this hot dog shop called Criff Dogs, and when you go into this hot dog shop, there is a wooden door at the back of the hot dog store that looks like this. It's not marked. It doesn't have any kind of signage on it. And for all you know, you're sitting there in one of those red stools eating your hot dog, and people are going into this door. Well, what you find when you go into this door is a secret bar called the Please Don't Tell bar. And this screenshot that is on the there right now, this is the entire website for the Please Don't Tell bar. There's no address given. There's only a phone number for reservations. They only take reservations the day of the day that you call. So you can't call for a reservation today. You have to call tomorrow for a reservation tomorrow, and they have a very limited number of people that they will allow in based on the capacity of the establishment. But there's no advertising, there's nothing. It's just this sort of quirky, out of the way, inside of a hot dog store entrance to this bar. And of course, Please Don't Tell is basically code for please do tell. And it's been an extraordinary word of mouth because now when people find out about this, it's something interesting to talk about. If you actually go into this bar, you can tell people about this experience. Not much different than eating the $100 cheesesteak, right? So this is a good example of social currency, finding something that's interesting, unusual, that people would be wanting to talk about. So here's some ways that you can integrate social currency, find things that are surprising, that break people's patterns. And they give an example in the book of Blendtec. I've used that example before. If you're not familiar with Blendtec, let's see, Blendtec, whoops, that's not what I'm looking for. Blendtec is the videos on YouTube of the Blendtec blenders that are blending all kinds of things to smithereens, like iPhones and iPads and crowbars and Chuck Norris and combo meals from McDonald's and any other thing you can think of. But it's just something that's interesting and unexpected. And I love that example of Blendtec. I won't show you the Blendtec video right now because I've shown them before on different webinars. But I love the example of Blendtec because it takes something that seems pretty mundane. And think about all the demonstrations you've seen for blenders before. I mean, I've seen them at Costco. I've seen them on infomercials before. And they always take and they blend up things into juice and into soups and into all these different expected things. And unless you happen to be interested in blending something into juice, which you might be if you're in the market for a blender, but you're probably not interested in that if you're not in the market for a blender, it's just not very unexpected. In fact, it's totally expected. But then when you take an iPhone and you stick it in there, you take a 2x4 and you stick it in there, it has some intrinsic interesting characteristic to it, and it makes people want to talk about it and share it. Now, again, the reason I like that particular example is it's something that is pretty mundane, and once you see that you can blend iPhones in a Blendtec, it might seem like, well, a blender is a lot more interesting than my product. But go back before you knew about blending iPhones and think about a blender. It's just not that interesting. And you probably think that your business is not all that interesting, and it might not have anything that's all that talkable, aboutable. if you can even say that. But I challenge you to think about that in a little bit different light, and to think about what you could do or what is different or unexpected. I mean, go through the MYM Innovation Starters and look through there, and there's some things that can give you some ideas within that. But just think in terms of things that are unexpected. We do want to make sure that we keep, like Blendtec blending phones, that we want to keep the topic fairly consistent with what we're trying to sell. So blending iPhones is consistent with blending, and it shows the sales point that it can blend anything. So think about yours. He gives another example in the book of black toilet paper. I don't know how good of a example that is, but it is unexpected, breaks the pattern. Next, mysteries and controversies. You know, there's an interesting blog that that I read. It's called the Matt Walsh blog. I want to tell you about this for just a second. Matt Walsh is a Catholic guy, and I'm not a Catholic, but I am a Christian. And so he's sort of this conservative Christian guy. And he's a guy, very interestingly, that went from having his own little teeny blog that literally nobody paid attention to blowing it up to where he's got now hundreds of thousands of followers. He's had something like 30 million page views. And all of this happened in an extremely short amount of time through viral sharing on Facebook. And so here's what happened. He wrote a story or a blog posting last year. I don't remember exactly when it was. And the topic, I believe, was on, God, I can't even remember what the topic was now. I believe it was on how men should treat their wives. And it was kind of flying in the face of standard culture, and it was something that was very touching and sweet and interesting, but it was controversial because it got a lot of the left-wing feminist group all up in arms, and it created a lot of sharing. It created a lot of comments, very negative comments, very positive comments, and from that time forth, this guy became a sensation, and he thrives on controversy. He'll blog about all kinds of politically high-charged topics, and it's done very well for him. But here's what's interesting. Whether you like him or not, maybe you hate him, maybe you like him, maybe you're a liberal, feminist, left-wing, whatever, but the interesting thing to me is how fast this phenomenon occurred. In fact, here's something really interesting. If you go to the Matt Walsh blog and you look at some of his postings from the last, say, 6 months or so, you will see that they average, in terms of comments for a given blog posting, anywhere from a minimum of several hundred to, in some cases, 3,000 or 4,000 comments on a single blog posting. Now, I'm not saying that that makes it good, bad, or otherwise. I'm saying it's a lot of people are reading and commenting. But here's what's interesting. If you go back a year and you look at some of his posts that are a year old, there are literally maybe 2 or 3 comments to the whole dumb post. And the topics are the same. He hasn't really changed his style much. He's just become popular. And this is through this concept of mysteries, controversies. And, you know, you look at that and you say, from a business owner standpoint, is that something that I really want to get involved with? Controversies, mysteries. And the answer is maybe it is and maybe it isn't. Whoa. That's supposed to say Matt Walsh blog, but it just says Ma. I don't know why. But think about it for a minute. Social currency, things that people can talk about, things that people want to share because it's interesting. The next thing he talks about in the book is what he calls game mechanics, giving people something to talk and brag about. Gives the example of frequent flyer programs, and it's something that people can track, and it's fun to amass points. And, you know, I looked at that example, and I thought, well, is that really true? And then I realized it kind of is true. I mean, I'm a guy that racks up a fair amount of frequent flyer miles. I mean, not probably more than some people, but I get a fair amount. And as you rack them up, it becomes sort of fun, and it becomes sort of a challenge. It's like a bank account, and you're almost loath to spend them because it goes back down. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic and situation with the frequent flyer programs. Also, we've talked about at MYM in some of our previous webinars and articles, and I think we've got some coming up on this topic, called wink-wink deals. Well, what's a wink-wink deal? A wink-wink deal is a deal that you set up for your customers that appears to them to be something that you did specifically and only for them with a wink, hey, I'm doing this just for you, when in reality it's something that might be systematically administered to all of your customers, or at least a certain portion of your customers. There's an example given in an article that I wrote about a car wash. And the car wash had a punch card, which is a frequent flyer program, right? But they also layered on that what I call a wink-wink deal. So here's what they would do. They would hand somebody the frequent flyer card, the frequent wash card at the car wash, and it required 10 punches to earn a free car wash. You're familiar with this kind of punch card, right? There's lots of places that have them. But what they would do is they would instruct their employees, they would give somebody the card new, and they would punch for the wash that they just got, so that's 1 out of the 10, and then they would actually instruct the employee to look around as if to be trying to avoid getting caught in a very discreet and subtle way, not in a, hey, we're about to, you know, have a Watergate scandal kind of a way, but they would punch 2 additional punches so that 3 total would be punched, 1 that they actually earned and 2 that were given for free, and they would say, hey, these 2, this will just get you a little head start, and they'd hand it back to the person, and they would now have 3 punches towards their 10 instead of 1, and it was done with the wink-wink. Hey, I'm going to do this just for you because I like you, or just because I want to, or because whatever. And they found that the redemption value was far higher on the people that were given the head start than the people that weren't. In other words, they were more likely to follow through and finish the 10 punches when they got the head start. There's also a story that I documented in that article about waiters that would induce higher tips by giving candy to their customers at the end of the meal with the bill. I think Olive Garden is famous for handing little mints with the bill. But here's what they did. They did an experiment with this, and they found that if they gave candy instead of not giving candy, that it was a higher tip. That seems pretty obvious. They also found that 2 candies was worth a better tip than 1 candy. But then they found this out, which was pretty interesting. They found that if they gave a candy, started to walk away, then turned back around and fished another candy out of their pocket and handed it to them and said, hey, let me give you an extra one, then it actually made the tip go up even higher, to the highest level among all the controlled experiments. So 1 was better than 0, 2 was better than 1, but 2 that were given with one of them being a, hey, let me just give you a little extra, was even higher. So this is what we call game mechanics in the book called Contagious, giving people something to talk about, something to brag about. If you're treated in a way that seems favorable to you, that's something that you might want to talk about and share about. And you say, well, I don't know, are people really going to share that they got 2 extra punches at the car wash? And the answer is maybe they will, maybe they won't. Depends on how your game works. So think about things that you can either reward people for, or deals that you can give people that are sort of off the price list or off the standard situation. If you're the donut shop, it's the 13th donut hole, right? Or it's the bag of a dozen donut holes when you buy a dozen regular donuts or something like that. That gives some social currency. In the book, he gives the example of Snapple facts. Snapple, of course, being a fruit drink. And in the 90s, they started putting these facts under there. Real fact number 737, the human brain takes up 2% of the human body weight but uses 20% of the energy. And they put these under there, under the lid, so that people would then share these interesting facts. And when somebody would say, well, geez, where did you, I mean, how do you know that? That's an oddball thing. Kangaroos can't jump backwards is one of the Snapple facts. And it comes up just in offhand, non-premeditated conversation, and it has social currency. Well, where did you know that? Well, I learned it from Snapple. Boom. They just shared Snapple. That's what we're looking for, okay? The Southwest Airline wrapper, I've shown this on a different video also. Southwest Airline guy gets up there and he starts doing a wrap for the safety explanation instead of just reading it off the card. It's unexpected, and people talk about it, okay? let's go through some takeaways on social currency, and we'll move a little bit faster through some of these other elements, but this was one of the more interesting things I thought, the social currency. Give people something to talk about or a game to play. The electrician that caters specifically to women is a good example of social currency. So the woman calls, she has the electrician or the plumber that caters to women specifically. It says on the website, it says on the card, it says on everything, and now it's something that they're more likely to talk about. I don't think two ladies would probably spend a whole lot of time talking about the fact that an electrician came over and fixed a fan, but if it was the electrician that caters to women, it's more talk-aboutable, okay? 5-minute windows. You've heard me talk on these webinars before about Dan, the 5-minute window man in Columbus, Ohio. He built a business that made him a millionaire sitting in his basement essentially selling windows in 5 minutes. And the reality is it's so memorable and unusual and different that people talk about it. There's a trust value that's engendered there with that approach, but there's also a tremendous social currency. You wouldn't believe this guy came over and he sold me windows in 5 minutes. It was, you know, it was an amazing experience. We've got a client called Castro Roofing here in Dallas. That's a commercial roofing company, and we worked with them. We're working with them currently, but we also worked with them a few years ago, and we created what we called the $5,000 Worst Leak Challenge. And they swore up and down to me that they could fix any leak that any commercial building would have, no matter how many times before other companies had attempted and failed to fix it. And they said to me, surprisingly, I didn't realize this, but it's true, apparently, according to them, that any kind of an organization that has multiple buildings that they're managing, whether it be a city that has multiple city buildings or a school district with multiple schools, maybe a property management company that manages multiple buildings, said any organization that has multiple buildings almost always has buildings that have leaks that they just simply can't fix. They'll send guys up there to look at them, to apply remedies, and it just never works. They just keep leaking. And he said that they could fix any leak, and they had ways and means of doing that and making sure it happened. And so we took and we talked about creating something that was a little more audacious, the $5,000 Worst Leak Challenge. And the way it works is this: let us fix the leak. We'll charge you the regular price to fix the leak. All of their leaks have a double money-back guarantee anyway, which means if we fix it and it leaks, we will pay you back your money and the same amount of money on top of that so you can go hire somebody else to fix it. But they up the ante for this Worst Leak Challenge. We'll give you $5,000 cash if the leak is not fixed. And it gives people very little risk in having them try, right? Because if they can't fix it, they're going to get $5,000. But it also has tremendous social currency among these kinds of people, whether they be property managers or building managers, physical facilities managers, and so forth. The $5,000 Worst Leak Challenge. Okay? Interesting concept. The Pink Window Washing Company. This is a strategy I gave an insider member on Insiders Open Forum several years ago. I said, take everything you do and make it pink. And I also give the same strategy to a painting company, Samurai Painting. Well, here's what I mean. Make fluorescent pink your company color. Make your van pink, make your drop cloths pink, your painters' shirts and overalls pink, make the paintbrushes pink, make the paint cans pink, make the invoices pink, make the job signs pink, make everything pink. And you know what? You will gain social currency because people want to talk about the crazy pink company that everything they did was pink, except for, of course, the paint, unless you want pink paint. So I'm not telling you to make everything you do pink. I'm simply telling you that it's something that could potentially work for you. Not that exact thing, but some derivative thereof. Talked on a different webinar before about Home of Liquid Insanity, or the free steak. And you say, well, what's liquid insanity? And I was talking about, in that particular context, a deli that opens, and it's a sandwich shop, and it's just a normal shop in the strip mall that has other restaurants nearby, and there's nothing particularly interesting or unique or different about it. And what if you concocted some kind of a drink, and I'm not talking about alcohol here, I mean, if you had a bar, you could create liquid insanity that was alcoholic, but I'm talking about just something that is different than the typical Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, Mountain Dew, or even the strawberry lemonade or the raspberry lemonade or the tea chillers or whatever that they have. Something that has a unique, interesting formula and flavor. And you know what? I'll bet you anything. I'll make you a challenge. If you gave me an internet connection in 30 minutes, I could come up with something that I could call liquid insanity. You put it in there, you serve it as your home brewed, whatever, specialty drink, and people walk in looking for liquid insanity. Instead of ordering a Coke, they ordered liquid insanity. And it's just something fun and interesting and different to do. It gives people something to talk about. Maybe you then take it to the next level. I drank liquid insanity. You give them a little sticker or a pin or a bumper sticker or a T-shirt or a hat or a wristband, whatever, right? Just something. That starts getting into our chapter that we'll get to in a minute called public. But for now, let's just finish up social currency by talking about, again, the donut shop. You've heard me talk about donut wars. And what if you created a giant dragon donut? I mean, think about how easy it is to have a donut shop that has nothing interesting or unique or different. You just make stinking donuts, and people come in and they buy them when they think about it, and they don't buy them when they don't think about it. But if you created the giant dragon donuts, now I put dragon on there, and you might be thinking, well, what's the tie to dragon? It's the local high school that my kids go to. They're the South Lake Carroll Dragons. So around here, dragon has a lot of cachet, and in your town, the local high school mascot probably has a fair amount of cachet too. So this is all we're trying to do, is we're trying to cash in on that cachet. Giant Dragon's donut, it's oversized, maybe it's green and black, which are the school colors. It's got frosting on it, whatever the case is, something interesting, unique, and different that people can talk about. Give them some social currency, okay? Let's go to the next topic, which is triggers. The idea here is things that are top of mind are also top of tongue. Conversations are influenced by what is all around us all the time. Most conversations that people have are small talk. They're talking about the weather and construction delays and soccer games and just little nonsense topics that aren't really that interesting or relevant or valuable, but they are stuff that people are talking about. Well, here's what he's trying to say, is that if we can identify things that are talked about a lot and then attach our product to that, it could be an interesting way to make things go a little bit more viral, okay? So he talks about what he calls indirect triggers, peanut butter and what goes with peanut butter. This is just to give you an idea of associating things. Indirect triggers, peanut butter, and of course jelly, right? That goes with that. Tie your product to something else that people talk about all the time. And here's a case study that he gives in the book. It's about Kit Kat. Give me a break was the Kit Kat slogan and song that was launched in 1986. I'm sure most of you, or probably all of you, know about it. Give me a break, break me off a piece of that Kit Kat bar. Remember that? Kit Kat. And it went well with the product itself because it breaks and it has a crack to it, it snaps. But they started losing steam, and by the time 30 years had rolled around, their sales were declining at a rate of about 5% per year. For a major brand like Kit Kat, that's a pretty big hit, okay? And they found that people, when polled, still said that they loved the product. There was not any negative association to the product. People just kind of forgot about it. There's other, a lot more products on the market than there was in 1986. So people just kind of let it go. And so they started thinking about, well, what can we do to increase the sales? And they thought, well, give me a break. What's the most famous word that goes with break? What kind of break? And the answer is coffee break. And they thought, well, what if we attached Kit Kat to the coffee break? And so they came out with the slogan, a break's best friend, in Kit Kat and coffee, which has an interesting, nice little alliterate, that word I'm trying to say, but it's not coming out right, value to it. Kit Kat and coffee. And by golly, it worked. They went from $300 million a year Remember, they were losing 5% per year before this campaign, and they resurged to $500 million in just a 5-year period of time. Pretty impressive. Taking something called Kit Kat, attaching it to something called coffee break. People are always having coffee. Coffee is all over the place. Since 1986, surely coffee in our national consciousness has become a lot more important. Starbucks and all that kind of stuff. So it's a good fit. So here's some takeaways for triggers. What can you tie your brand or product to? Well, look for something that's frequent, something that's common, and see if you can tie it to it. Now, this is pretty hard to do, but I'm going to give you some examples that'll give you some practical type of advice, okay? Let's look at this. HVAC repair. If you're in the business of fixing HVAC units, then you might want to talk about in your advertising thermostat. And the reason is that people don't think about their air conditioning unit that often, but they do think about their thermostat a lot because they're adjusting it constantly. So if in an advertising campaign the word thermostat was used over and over again, then people might start to associate that with your company. Windows, talk about the energy bill, or the thermostat also for windows. So think about this. What if you ran a campaign, and these are things that work with campaigns. This is not something that you just run out there one time and it instantly takes over. It's going to take some traction. But if you said in your campaign, when you open your energy bill, think about your windows. When you open your energy bills, think about your windows. If your energy bills are high, think about your windows. When you open your energy bill, think about your windows. And then we get people conditioned to start thinking about their windows when they think about their energy bills. Now, how often does your energy bill come? Well, it comes once a month. And if we can get them thinking about their energy bill and thinking about windows at the same time, then that's an interesting connection that we could start to bring. You could also do that with your thermostat. When you get your energy bill, if it's too high, it's your windows to blame. It's your windows to blame. Energy bill, windows, energy bill, windows. Get people to connect these two things, peanut butter and jelly, right? Kit Kat and coffee, windows and high energy bills. But we've got to ingrain it into people's brains. What about roof? Talk about the rain. How often does it rain? Well, if you're here in Texas where I am, the answer is not very much. We're in pretty good drought going on around here. But nevertheless, what if you ran a campaign where you said, hey, when it rains, is this the time your roof is going to leak? When it rains, will your roof leak? Hey, it's just a matter of time before your roof's going to leak. When it rains, hey, the rain's in the forecast, is your roof going to leak? And you get people thinking and a little bit on edge about their roof leaking when it rains. Okay? To give you an idea, sunrooms, talk about morning paper and coffee. Okay? We sell sunrooms typically to the older market, 55 to 75 is the sweet spot for sunroom sales. Most of these people drink coffee. Most of these people read the paper in the morning. Even if they read it on their iPad, they still read the paper. So you start tying morning paper and coffee to sunroom. Wouldn't it be great to read your morning paper and drink your coffee in your sunroom? And then the guy gets up the next morning and he goes and gets his newspaper and he gets his coffee and he goes and sits down at his kitchen table and he thinks, oh, this sucks. And we can start to tie things together. These are called triggers. So that now when they see coffee, when they see the newspaper, and they see these things frequently, right? Boom, it triggers them to sunroom, triggers them to sunroom, triggers them to sunroom, triggers them to sunroom. They look at the thermostat, triggers them to windows, triggers them to windows. They go adjust their thermostat. Wow, it's hot in here. Windows, it's hot in here. Windows, it's hot in here. Windows, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take something that's common and frequent in everyday life. We're trying to cause it to trigger whatever it is you want them to think about, okay? Let's move on to emotion. Now, this will be very short because, like I mentioned earlier, I found this to be the least interesting part of the book, but things that touch us emotionally, get us talking, that's pretty obvious. They talk about the emotion of awe, the sense of wonder and amazement when somebody's inspired by great knowledge, beauty, or might. Awe. I'm not really sure how to incorporate that into your business. Anger and anxiety create strong emotions that cause people to talk. What you're looking for is high arousal emotions, one that people get actively thinking. This is why the blogs do so well also. Emotion. The emotion comes up. So I think I'm going to just kind of leave that there. And I want to talk about this one, public. People often imitate those around them. Now, we've talked about social proof in lots of marketing situations before. What you want to do is find ways to make your product or service, make sure that your product or service is as visible in the public eye as possible. You can do this with colors and logos, design. Think about the Apple earbuds. They made a very conscious decision in a sea of then, at that time, all black earbuds. They said, no, we're going to make ours completely white so that when people see them, it's a trigger and it's public. People can see it, that that's an Apple product. You don't even have to see what the earphones are attached to. You know, based on just seeing those white earbuds, that it's attached to an Apple product. The Pringles tube is another example of something where people see this can. It's visible that there's something different about this chip, right? Stax has tried to copy that, but you get the idea. Signs and other giveaways that you can make what you're doing public so that other people who normally would not understand or see or experience the fact that your customers do business with you, now they have the ability to see it. Give an example in the book of University of Arizona drinking problem, and more specifically binge drinking problem, and they cite several statistics about the prevalence of underage binge drinking on college campuses. And I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but let's just put it this way. It's astounding and it's pretty frightening, okay? Binge drinking being a certain number of drinks to a certain level of drunkenness, okay? So they started trying to figure out, well, how can we reduce binge drinking at this college? Oh, RAD. They should say ran ads. Let's see here. Let's see here. I'll be right back. All right, like I was saying, they ran ads talking about dangers and deaths from binge drinking, and they found that these ads had very, very minimal effect, okay? They didn't really affect teenage drinking at all. Binge drinking, they found that they published information about deaths. There's 1,800 deaths per year from underage drinking or related problems, and 600,000 injuries that come from the same problem. And they found that nobody paid any attention. It didn't have any impact. They put the cars out for drunk driving and tried to scare kids, and they just kept drinking. Well, then they did some research, and they found out through surveys that a lot of these kids, not all, but a high percentage of kids thought that their peers' alcohol drinking habits were out of control. In other words, they didn't approve of it. They said, yeah, these people binge drink, and they didn't consider themselves a binge drinker, but they considered the people that they hung out with to be binge drinkers. And so what they would do is they would be influenced by that behavior. So they would go to the party, their friends would be drinking, and this social proof starts to happen, right? Everyone's kind of looking around saying, well, what's everybody else doing? Well, they're drinking to the point of intoxication and beyond, and so I guess that's what I'll do, and it just becomes a social thing. Well, they ran another campaign via advertising, and this campaign didn't talk about deaths, it didn't talk about destruction, it didn't talk about negative consequences. It simply stated what they found in their surveys, which is that most kids only had 1 or 2 drinks at a time at a party, and 69% of kids had fewer than 4 drinks at the party. And that was considered the threshold of binge drinking, was 5 drinks or more. And by simply stating these facts, it gave credence to the idea that, well, maybe everybody isn't binge drinking, and I don't have to be a binge drinker. And they found that they actually did have a measurable decrease in binge drinking at that college. So, again, public, making information public, that not an attempt to shock or scare, but simply to inform, okay? Here's some other examples that you may be familiar with. Movember is raising awareness for prostate cancer, men's health, in November of every year. Of course, you've got the similar type of a scenario in October with Breast Cancer Awareness Month, where you've got NFL football players and Major League Baseball players, and it's even trickled down now into the high schools that wear pink accessories with their uniforms, whether that be cleats or gloves or something like that. And I think even the referees last year in the NFL were wearing pink hats. It's a public thing that makes people stop and notice and say, hey, and the Movember works the same way. You see a guy who normally is clean-shaven who now suddenly starts to grow this mustache, and by the end of the month he's got a big bushy mustache, and of course the natural thing to do is to ask him, hey, what's with the stash? Oh, well, it's part of Movember. I'm raising awareness for prostate cancer. Now there's viral word of mouth that's going on regarding that subject. Livestrong has been disgraced, of course, but this was a good example. They were looking for ways to raise awareness about cancer, also the Livestrong Foundation. This was back when he had lied to us but not been caught yet. And they brainstormed all these different ideas of ways to increase the awareness. And one of the major things they were going to do was a bike race across America. That may be misstating it a little bit. I don't think it was actually a race, but it was just going to be this big charity event where Lance Armstrong and others would join forces, and they would ride point to point, and they would get publicity and be on the news and generate awareness for this cause of cancer. And they weighed that, and they thought, this is a good idea, and we're going to get a lot of publicity, but it did seem to be somewhat fleeting and geographically specific. So if they happened to roll through St. Louis, Missouri, that was good, but St. Louis would have a little bit of publicity for a very short amount of time, and it really wouldn't affect anyone else in the country. And somebody came up with the idea for this stupid little yellow band. And they took a color that was not very commonly used for other companies and other, logos and whatnot. And they made these little bands, and they made 5 million of them, which was not a lot at the time. And they really had very low hopes, and they thought it was going to be a bust, and it just was something that they had no faith in, but somebody convinced them to go ahead with this project anyway. Long story short, they start selling these bands for a couple dollars each, and people start wearing it as a symbol that becomes very visible, and then social proof starts to kick in. And at the height of this, I can't remember the numbers, I don't have it in front of me, 50 million people were wearing these bands or something like this. And you know what, I don't know what the numbers were, but I can tell you, I remember, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago, you'd see these things flipping everywhere, people wearing these things. And it really did what they wanted to do, which is raise awareness for this foundation, for this cancer. And it was something that people had in an interpersonal situation. It was a personal endorsement, not just something that they saw on the news about this rally across America or whatever, and it made a big difference. So making things that are not public, right? So how can you do this? What's the takeaway from this? Well, if you're a contractor, which many of you are, job site signs, take one boxes, things like that. We've talked about those on other webinars. T-shirts, stickers, pens, okay? The movie theater that's near my house has a policy that if you buy a shirt for $20 at the beginning of the year, if you wear it to the movies, then they will give you free popcorn when you go. And the popcorn, of course, is like $95 per bag, so it's a pretty good deal for that whole year. Now, they kind of have actually made it more into a game, because it turns out you don't actually have to wear the shirt. It comes shrink-wrapped in this little circle puck-looking thing, you know how they shrink-wrap shirts. And so we actually just bring it with us and show it to them. We don't have to actually wear it. But that also is sort of a game. We talked about games earlier. But something that you could make public, could you give stickers or T-shirts or pens? I know that the T-shirts are very popular in with my kids, with the local dentists and orthodontists. And they pass these things out, and kids wear them to school, and it's good social proof that way. Donate money to a charity with purchase. It's fairly self-explanatory. Have a giveaway and make sure that a veteran wins. We talk about home show giveaways, but this is a good way to make it more public, is to make sure somebody that seems very needy wins it. Let's go to the next topic as we start to wrap up here. Practical value. People enjoy helping people. It shows that we care about them and strengthens our social bond. And the idea here is that people will share useful information. It doesn't have to be particularly interesting or exotic or sexy information, just practical and useful, okay? Giving advice in a short, straightforward way is the way that you can get people talking. And I'm going to give you an example from this guy named Ken. This is an old man, and he had a trick for shucking corn without leaving the annoying strings. Okay, you know what I'm talking about, the annoying strings, right, that are hard to get off. So he showed his daughter how to do this. She was astounded, and he made a video of it so that his daughter could, see it and have it, and she put it on YouTube. But her intent with putting this video on YouTube was just to show a couple of her friends, and I think her daughter who was overseas. And those friends talked to and shared it with a few friends and so on, and now it has almost 8 million views. I want to show you this video. It's ridiculous in its simplicity, but let's take a look real quick. No, hang on. We got no sound. Well, that's not going to work. My sound is not working on this particular video. Well, here's what he does. I'll let you at least see it while we're going through this. He takes the corn, and he's just some random old man. He's never made a video in his life. His daughter made this. He takes the corn out of the garden. He fast forwards to put it in the microwave, puts it in there for about 4 minutes per ear. Come on. Yep, that's what he does. Anyway, long story short, he then takes the corn out, takes a knife, cuts the end of it off, and sure enough, it just slips out. And you can see on here, 7.9 million views for some old man taking this knife. Here we go. And here you'll get to see the payoff here. He's going to slide it right out. Now you know how to do this too. And boom, there's your perfectly clean corn. Clean ears every time. Okay, so just kind of a dumb video. But it gives you an idea of just sharing information, okay? So I won't go into detail on that for sake of time, but let's go into the last one, which is stories. Everyone loves stories. Narratives are inherently more engrossing than basic facts, okay? People get sucked in early to the story. They'll stay for the conclusion. Jim Rohn used to say this. He was the motivational speaker. He's passed away a few years ago now. Says when a company does $10 million in sales, there are facts and figures about the accomplishment, but there are also stories about the $10 million, stories of struggle, failure, overcoming, and triumph. And he says you need to make sure that you remember to tell the stories, because people will very quickly weary and get bored of the facts and figures behind the accomplishment. So I would encourage you to look at your company and find the stories. They make advertising seem less like advertising. You remember the famous example of Jared, the Subway guy. He used to be fat. He was 425 pounds. So he started eating a veggie sandwich for lunch and a turkey sandwich for dinner. He lost 100 pounds in 3 months, and then he dropped from a 60-inch pants to a 34-inch pant waist. And, it went to this incredible story that's lasted, I don't know how many years now, 15 or 20 years, Jared, the Subway guy. He's going to be an old man pretty soon, but he stayed thin, I guess. How can you use stories in your business? Well, the first thing is your identity. Your identity is a big part of your storytelling. When we write identities, we're always looking for the narrative. What is the story that we're trying to tell? And then we also want to put your backstory on your About Us page. We want to find out some things that are interesting about you. What makes you you? What kinds of experiences have you had that have shaped who you are and how you function and what you do? And we put those on the About Us page. You can also explain difficult concepts with metaphors. We like to explain window efficiency like a car's mile per gallon. And we say, hey, when you think about a car's miles per gallon, everybody knows that a Prius is 50 miles per gallon, and that's good, and an SUV is 10 miles a gallon, and that's bad, and everything in between. And, the energy efficiency of a window is kind of the same way, except for we don't measure it with miles per gallon. We measure it with something called a U factor. And we go on to explain that. It's more interesting. Storytelling and advertising. I love to write advertisements for the radio that tell little stories. I gave some examples on some blog postings I've had recently. You might want to go back and listen to those, particularly one for an air conditioning company. And we write little stories into a lot of those ads about when I was a kid and when I used to go camping as a Boy Scout. Our Scoutmaster would always make us leave it cleaner than we found it. We'd pick up bread ties and pull tops and bottle caps, things that we didn't put there, but our Scoutmaster had us pick up anyway, so that we could always leave it cleaner than we found it. Little story, right? Well, that philosophy has stayed with me. Now the way that we run our company is we leave it cleaner than we found it. Little stories that are interesting that get people sucked in, so they want to hear what the conclusion is, and then you tie it, of course, to your point. And again, storytelling and advertising makes it seem less like advertising. There's a good example here in a print ad for one of our customers, which is Energy Swing Windows. And he had submitted to me on a Tuesday morning ad clinic an ad that's an advertorial, like you see here, that was talking about how they had won the Better Business Bureau Torch Award. And they'd won it twice, and it was a big accomplishment. And I told him, I said, nobody cares if you won the Torch Award. It's boring. Who cares? I mean, it represents something interesting, but here's what people do care about. What was it about your business that allowed you to win the Torch Award? And he says, well, it means that we have ethics and that we treat people in a fair way, even in adverse conditions. I said, well, give me an example. And he told me this story about how they lost $8,200 on a project that they messed up, even though it was their supplier's fault, but they took the fall for it, and that was a good example. And I said, well, tell that story then, because it's a lot more interesting. And sure enough, they wrote it into this ad. Local window company loses $8,200 on a botched project. Owner says he'd do it again in a heartbeat, and it tells this little story about what went wrong the second time, how they dealt with it, how the customer was thrilled. And this is an ad that produced a healthy amount of business for them. Okay, so stories, telling stories. So this is the book. It's called Contagious by Jonah Berger. Like I said at the beginning of the webinar, not my favorite book I've ever read of all time, but pretty good stories in there. I'd recommend it. I'd recommend it. If you haven't read The Tipping Point, or if you haven't read Made to Stick, I'd probably start there, but then make it over to Contagious. Put it in your marketing library. It's a good book. It's got some good stories, and it'll make you think. That's the most important thing. Hey, not every single word of every single page of every single book can be awesome, but this book has enough good stuff in it that I definitely recommend it. So go ahead and check it out. That's all I have for you today. We'll be back with you a week from today with our Tuesday morning ad clinic and combination insiders open forum. So we look forward to talking to you then. See you. Bye now.